What if I told you that the greatest love story in galactic history began with a human bartender who couldn't even afford rent? That one chance encounter in a dingy space station dive bar would reshape the destiny of two entire species? That sometimes the most ordinary person can become extraordinary simply by showing kindness to a stranger? This is the story of Marcus Chun, a failed engineer turned bartender on Nexus Station, and Zaratiel, a brilliant alien scientist running for her life. One random Tuesday night, their worlds collided in ways neither could imagine. What started as serving one last drink to a mysterious customer became a journey across the galaxy, a fight against impossible odds, and proof that love truly knows no boundaries. In a universe where humans are still the newcomers, where alien civilizations look down on our primitive ways, Marcus will show them all what humanity is really capable of. Not through superior technology or ancient wisdom, but through something far more powerful, the simple choice to care about someone else more than yourself. Get ready for a story that will make you believe in the impossible, laugh until your sides hurt, cry when you least expect it, and remind you why being human is the greatest adventure of all. Marcus Chun wiped down the sticky surface of the bar counter for the 100th time that evening, watching the amber liquid in his glass reflect the flickering neon lights of Nexus Station's seediest establishment. The gravity well wasn't exactly the career destination he'd imagined when he graduated from Earth's Technical Institute with dreams of building starships. Instead, here he was, serving cheap synthetic alcohol to smugglers, traders, and the occasional lost tourist who wandered too far from the main promenade. The station hummed around him with the constant vibration of massive engines keeping them stable in the asteroid field. Through the grimy viewport behind the bar, he could see the distant glow of the mining operations that kept this place profitable. Nexus Station existed for one reason. It was perfectly positioned between three major trade routes, making it a necessary stop for ships traveling between the core worlds and the Outer Rim territories. "Another round, Marcus," shouted Vax, a purple-skinned Zentari trader whose idea of personal hygiene seemed optional at best. He slammed his empty glass down with enough force to rattle the bottles behind the bar. Marcus nodded and reached for the bottle of Zentari Fire whiskey, a drink that could probably strip paint if you poured it on metal. He'd learned early in his bartending career not to ask questions about his customers' drinking habits. In a place like this, everyone had their reasons for wanting to forget something. The evening crowd was typical for a Tuesday, mostly regulars nursing their drinks and complaining about shipping delays, corrupt customs officials, or whatever personal disasters had brought them to this corner of space. Marcus had heard every sob story in the book: failed businesses, broken relationships, family members who disowned them for choosing life in the void over a comfortable existence on their home worlds. He understood their pain more than they knew. 3 years ago, he'd been on track to work for Stellar Dynamics, one of the premier starship design companies in human space. His final project at the Institute had been a revolutionary new engine design that promised to cut travel time between systems by 30%. Then, his advisor had died in a transport accident, and the project had been handed to another student whose father happened to sit on the company's board of directors. Suddenly, Marcus's groundbreaking work became someone else's ticket to success, while he found himself with a degree nobody wanted and student loans that felt like anchors around his neck. The job market for human engineers was brutal enough without the added disadvantage of being blacklisted by one of the major corporations for attitude problems, their polite way of saying he'd complained too loudly about having his work stolen. So here he was, mixing drinks for aliens and trying to save enough credits to get off this station before he lost what remained of his sanity. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was surrounded by the kinds of ships he'd dreamed of designing, watching them dock and depart while he served cheap alcohol to their crews. The bar's atmosphere shifted when she walked in. Marcus noticed immediately, not because she was particularly loud or dramatic in her entrance, but because she moved with a kind of careful precision that suggested someone trying very hard not to draw attention to herself. She was tall, probably close to 6 feet, with pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer slightly under the bar's harsh lighting. Her hair was silver white and cut short in a practical style that framed angular features. Most striking were her eyes, a deep violet color that seemed to hold flecks of starlight. She was clearly Avalari, one of the more mysterious alien species that humans had encountered since joining the galactic community. The Avalari were known for their advanced technology and their tendency to keep to themselves. Marcus had only seen a few in person during his years on the station, and they never stayed long or talked much to anyone. This one was different, though. She moved to a corner table in the shadows, but Marcus could see she was nervous. Her eyes kept darting to the entrance, and she jumped slightly every time someone new came through the door. She was running from something or someone. That much was obvious. For several minutes, she just sat there, not ordering anything. Marcus debated whether to approach her. The gravity well wasn't exactly known for its table service, but she looked like she might bolt if he made any sudden movements. Finally, she caught his eye and raised her hand slightly. Marcus grabbed a clean glass and walked over to her table. "What can I get you?" "Something strong," she said in accented but perfect standard. Her voice was softer than he'd expected, with a musical quality that made even those two simple words sound elegant. "And something that will help me think clearly." Marcus smiled. "Those are usually contradictory requests in my experience. Strong drinks tend to make thinking harder, not easier." For the first time since entering the bar, she almost smiled. "Then, perhaps something that will help me stop thinking altogether. Now that I can manage." Marcus returned to the bar and considered his options. The Avalari had unique biochemistry that made them react differently to various substances than most other species. He'd learned that from his brief stint working station maintenance, when he'd had to clean up after an Avalari diplomat who'd made the mistake of drinking Terran whiskey and ended up unconscious for 6 hours. He mixed together a combination of Aldebaran brandy and Tau Ceti spirit with a splash of something called Void Walker that was supposedly popular on the Avalari homeworlds. The result was a deep purple liquid that seemed to swirl with its own inner light. When he brought it back to her table, she looked at the drink with genuine surprise. "You know Avalari preferences?" "I know a little about a lot of things. Comes with the territory when you work in a place like this." Marcus set the glass down in front of her. "I'm Marcus, by the way. Marcus Chun." She hesitated before answering. "Zaratil. Thank you for the drink." Marcus started to head back to the bar, but something in her tone made him pause. She sounded lost in a way that had nothing to do with being in an unfamiliar place. "You okay? You seem like you might be having a rough day." Zaratil took a sip of her drink and closed her eyes as if savoring not just the taste but the temporary escape it provided. When she opened them again, Marcus was struck by how much sadness he saw there. "I suppose you could say that. I have made some choices recently that have left me somewhat displaced." Marcus glanced around the bar. Most of the other patrons were absorbed in their own conversations or staring into their drinks. "Displaced how? If you don't mind me asking." For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then, she gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Do you have a moment to sit? I find myself in need of conversation with someone who has no stake in my difficulties." Marcus looked back at the bar. Vax was working on his 4th glass of fire whiskey and seemed content to drink in silence. The other customers appeared settled for the evening. Sure. Slow night anyway. As he sat down across from her, Marcus found himself genuinely curious about this mysterious Avalari woman. In his 3 years on Nexus Station, most aliens had treated him with polite indifference at best. The fact that she was actively seeking conversation was unusual enough to be interesting. "So what kind of choices leave someone displaced?" he asked. Zaratil took another sip of her drink before answering. "The kind where you discover that the people you trusted most have been lying to you your entire life. Where you learn that your life's work has been used for purposes that go against everything you believe in. Where standing up for what is right means losing everything you thought you knew about yourself." Marcus felt a familiar twist in his stomach. Her words hit closer to home than she could know. "That sounds like more than a rough day. That sounds like a complete life upheaval." An accurate description. She studied his face with those striking violet eyes. "You speak as if you understand something about such upheavals." Marcus couldn't help but laugh, though there wasn't much humor in it. "You could say that. I used to think I was going to change the galaxy with my brilliant engineering innovations. Turns out the galaxy had other plans." "What happened?" Before he could stop himself, Marcus found himself telling her the whole story. About his dreams of building ships that would revolutionize space travel, about his stolen research, about ending up on a backwater station serving drinks to people who couldn't care less about his lost potential. He wasn't sure why he was sharing so much with a complete stranger, but there was something about her careful attention that made the words come easily. When he finished, Zaratiel was quiet for a long moment. You were betrayed by someone you trusted. My advisor. Though I guess technically he died before the real betrayal happened. His replacement was the one who handed my work over to someone with better connections. And now you serve drinks instead of building dreams. Marcus shrugged. Not exactly how I planned to spend my 20s, but life has a way of surprising you. What about you? What kind of work were you doing before your life went sideways? Zaratiel's expression darkened. I was a scientist. Specifically, I worked on something called the Harmony Project. We were supposed to be developing technology that would help different species communicate more effectively, break down the barriers between civilizations. That sounds like important work. It was. Or at least, I thought it was. She finished her drink and stared into the empty glass. It turns out the technology we developed can also be used to control minds, to force compliance rather than encourage understanding. My government has been testing it on prisoner populations, planning to use it as a weapon against species they consider threats. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Including humans? Especially humans. Your species' rapid expansion has made many in the Avalari leadership nervous. They see humanity as unpredictable, dangerous. The Harmony Project technology could theoretically be used to make humans more manageable. The full implications of what she was telling him began to sink in. And you found out about this? I discovered the real purpose of my work 3 days ago. When I tried to object, when I threatened to expose what they were doing, I was told that I would be relocated to a facility where I could continue my research under closer supervision. A polite way of saying I would be imprisoned for the rest of my life. So you ran. I ran. I took what research data I could carry and stole a ship. I have been moving from station to station ever since, trying to figure out what to do with what I know. Marcus was quiet for several minutes, processing what she'd told him. The idea that an advanced alien civilization was developing technology specifically to control human behavior was terrifying. But what struck him even more was the courage it must have taken for her to risk everything to stop it. Why tell me this? He asked finally. For all you know, I could turn you in for whatever reward they're offering. Zaratiel smiled sadly. Because you are the first person I have encountered since leaving Avalari space who looked at me and saw another being in distress rather than an opportunity or a threat. Because sometimes when everything familiar falls away, you have to trust in the kindness of strangers. That's a dangerous way to live. Perhaps. But what is the alternative? To assume everyone is an enemy? To trust no one? That is no way to live at all. Marcus found himself impressed by her logic, even in the face of what had to be overwhelming fear and uncertainty. So what's your plan now? You can't keep running forever. I know. But I also cannot return to Avalari space, and I have no allies among the other species who might be able to help expose what my government is doing. The evidence I carry means nothing without someone willing to listen and act on it. An idea began forming in Marcus's mind, one that was probably insane but felt right in a way he couldn't explain. What if you had someone willing to help? Zaratiel looked at him skeptically. You are a bartender on a space station in the middle of nowhere. What could you possibly do against the Avalari government? You'd be surprised what a desperate human can accomplish when properly motivated. Besides, I might not look like much right now, but I wasn't always pouring drinks for a living. I still have some contacts in the engineering community, people who might be very interested in hearing about secret weapon development. You would risk your safety to help me? Why? You barely know me. Marcus considered her question seriously. The smart thing would be to finish their conversation, send her on her way, and go back to his safe, boring life of mixing drinks and avoiding complications. But looking at her sitting there, clearly exhausted and frightened but still determined to do the right thing despite the cost, he realized he couldn't just walk away. Because 3 years ago, someone stole my chance to make a difference in the galaxy. Maybe this is the universe giving me another shot. He extended his hand across the table. I'm in if you'll have me. Zaratiel stared at his outstretched hand for a long moment. Then, slowly, she reached out and took it. Her skin was surprisingly warm despite its pale color. and Marcus felt a strange jolt of electricity at the contact. Very well, Marcus-chun. It seems we are now partners in what will likely be a very dangerous endeavor. Partners it is. Marcus squeezed her hand gently before letting go. Though I have to warn you, I have absolutely no idea what we're doing. For the first time since she'd entered the bar, Zaratiel laughed. Marcus spent the rest of that night lying awake in his small quarters, staring at the ceiling, and wondering if he'd completely lost his mind. In the space of a single conversation, he'd gone from resigned bartender to potential galactic fugitive. The rational part of his brain kept insisting he should march down to Zaratiel's temporary lodging in the morning and explain that he'd gotten caught up in the moment, that helping her was beyond his capabilities. The rest of him knew he was already committed. He'd given his notice to Griselda, the station's perpetually cranky bar owner, citing a family emergency back on Earth. She'd grumbled about short notice, but had paid him his final wages without much fuss. Truth was, reliable bartenders were easy to find in a place like Nexus Station, and unreliable ones were even easier. Marcus fell somewhere in the middle of that spectrum, competent enough to serve drinks without poisoning anyone, but not charismatic enough to build a loyal following. By morning, he'd transferred his meager savings to a portable credit chip and packed his few belongings into a single duffel bag. 3 years of his life on Nexus Station, and everything he owned could fit in a container smaller than most people's laundry hampers. The realization should have been depressing, but instead it felt liberating. He met Zaratiel at the agreed-upon location, a small cafe in the station's commercial district that served passable coffee and minded its own business about customer conversations. She looked different in the daylight, more vulnerable somehow. The confidence she'd projected the night before seemed fragile, as if she was struggling to maintain her composure in the face of everything that had happened. I was not entirely certain you would come, she admitted as he sat down across from her. I wasn't entirely certain either, Marcus replied honestly. But here we are. She'd already ordered for both of them. Coffee for him, and something that looked like tea but smelled faintly of ozone for herself. I have been thinking about our situation throughout the night. We face several immediate challenges. Marcus appreciated her direct approach, such as, first, we need transportation. The ship I stole to escape Avalari space is distinctive. Too distinctive to use for long-distance travel without drawing attention. Second, we need to find someone with both the authority and the willingness to act on the information I carry. Third, we need to stay alive long enough to accomplish the first 2 objectives. Cheerful list. Marcus sipped his coffee, which was actually better than he'd expected. What about the research data? How much do you actually have? Zaratiel touched a small device attached to her belt. Complete specifications for the Harmony Project technology, test results from the prisoner experiments, communication logs discussing target populations for deployment. Enough to prove what they are planning, if we can find the right people to share it with. And the wrong people would be anyone working for the Avalari government or their allies. Correct. Which unfortunately includes representatives from several species that might otherwise be sympathetic to our cause. The Avalari have been very careful to cultivate relationships with other major powers in this sector. Marcus thought about the problem while finishing his coffee. What about the Terran Colonial Authority? They'd definitely be interested in hearing about a plot targeting humans. Perhaps, but they would also likely attempt to seize the technology for their own use rather than working to ensure it is destroyed. Governments rarely turn down the opportunity to acquire new weapons, regardless of how those weapons were developed. She had a point. Marcus had grown up hearing stories about the TCA's tendency to prioritize human interests above all other considerations. They'd probably view the Harmony Project as a useful tool for managing alien populations rather than a violation of basic sentient rights. So we need someone with influence, but without government connections. Someone with a reputation for doing the right thing even when it's not profitable. Zaratiel nodded. Do you know such a person? Marcus was quiet for a moment, thinking through his limited network of contacts from his engineering days. Most of them worked for major corporations now, which meant they'd be subject to political pressures and profit motives. But there was one name that kept coming to mind. Maybe. There's a woman named Dr. Sarah Chun, no relation, despite the name. She used to work for Stellar Dynamics, but left to start an independent research foundation focused on ethical technology development. Last I heard, she was operating out of the Kepler sector, working with mixed species teams on projects that benefit everyone rather than serving corporate interests. Could she be trusted with information of this magnitude? If anyone could be, it would be her. Dr. Chun has a reputation for putting principles above profits. She's also well-respected enough that if she spoke out about the Harmony project, people would listen. Zaratiel considered this. The Kepler sector is approximately 2 weeks' travel from here, assuming we can find appropriate transportation. That gives my former colleagues considerable time to track us down. Which brings us back to the transportation problem. Marcus leaned back in his chair, thinking, what kind of ship did you steal? Maybe we can modify it enough to avoid recognition. A small research vessel, designed for extended solo missions. Fast and well-equipped, but, as I mentioned, quite distinctive. It bears Avalari government markings and registry codes that would immediately identify it to anyone with access to standard databases. What if we didn't try to hide the ship itself, but changed who appears to be flying it? Zaratiel looked puzzled. I do not understand. Marcus felt a familiar excitement building, the same feeling he used to get when working through complex engineering problems. Most security systems focus on ship identification and crew manifests. If we could make it look like the ship was legitimately transferred to new owners, we might be able to travel openly without raising suspicions. How would we accomplish such a deception? I might know a guy. Marcus grinned. Back when I was working maintenance here on the station, I got to know some of the less officially sanctioned service providers. There's a Vaxxan named Crix who specializes in paperwork problems. For the right price, he can make almost any transaction look legitimate in the databases. This Crix would help us forge ship registration documents. For enough credits, Crix would probably forge documents declaring you the rightful owner of a core world battleship. The question is whether we have enough credits to afford his services. Zaratiel reached into her jacket and pulled out a small pouch. When she opened it, Marcus saw more high-denomination credit chips than he'd ever seen in one place. I was not entirely without resources when I left Avalari space. My position in the research program came with certain privileges. Marcus whistled softly. That's enough to buy passage to the Rim territories in luxury accommodations. How much of it are you willing to spend on fake paperwork? All of it, if necessary. Credits are useless if we are captured or killed before we can expose what the Avalari are planning. Her matter-of-fact tone when discussing the possibility of their deaths sent a chill down Marcus's spine. This wasn't just an adventure or a chance to make a difference. It was a genuine life-or-death situation. But, looking at Zaratiel's determined expression, he realized that backing down was no longer an option. Whatever happened next, they were committed to seeing this through. All right then. Let's go have a conversation with Crix. Finding the Vaxxan forger required a trip to the most questionable section of Nexus Station, where the lighting was dim and the air recycling systems worked overtime to combat the smell of too many different species living in too small a space. Crix operated out of what appeared to be a legitimate data services shop, but everyone knew his real business involved making inconvenient facts disappear from official records. The Vaxxan himself was a small, reptilian creature with golden scales and quick, intelligent eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of his surroundings. When Marcus and Zaratiel entered his shop, Crix immediately focused on the Avalari woman with obvious interest. Marcus Chun, Crix said in heavily accented standard. Been long time since you darkened my doorway. What brings you to see old Crix? And with such interesting company. Business proposition, Crix. My friend here needs some documents updated to reflect a change in ship ownership. Crix's eyes narrowed slightly. What kind of ship we talking about? Avalari research vessel, Zaratiel said directly. Currently registered to the Avalari Science Directorate. I need it transferred to appear as if it was legally purchased by an independent operator. The Vaxxan was quiet for a long moment, his head tilted at an angle that suggested he was thinking furiously. Avalari government ship. That is, complicated request. Such changes require access to very secure databases, creation of supporting documentation, establishment of plausible transaction history. How much? Marcus asked. 50,000 credits. plus additional 10,000 for emergency rush processing, since I assume you need this completed quickly. Marcus felt his heart sink. Even with Zaratiel's resources, 60,000 credits was an enormous sum. But, before he could start negotiating, she was already reaching for her pouch. Acceptable, she said, counting out the required chips. Crix's eyes went wide as he saw the amount of money she was carrying. You are either very wealthy or very desperate. Both, Zaratiel replied. How long will this take? Give me 8 hours. Come back tonight, bring ship registration codes, and current documentation. By morning, your vessel will belong to independent freight operator with clean history and legitimate business credentials. As they left Crix's shop, Marcus found himself shaking his head in amazement. You just spent more money than I've made in 3 years like it was pocket change. Material wealth means nothing if my people succeed in enslaving yours, Zaratiel said quietly. Besides, I spent my entire adult life working for the Avalari government. Those credits represent compensation for years of service. It seems appropriate to use them to undo the damage my work has caused. Her words reminded Marcus of the bigger picture. This wasn't just about helping one person escape from her problems. It was about preventing a conspiracy that could affect millions of human lives. The weight of that responsibility was almost overwhelming. They spent the rest of the day gathering supplies and preparing for their journey. Marcus used some of his remaining credits to purchase basic provisions and emergency equipment, while Zaratiel focused on organizing the research data and creating secure backup copies. By evening, they were as ready as they could be for what promised to be a very dangerous trip. When they returned to Crix's shop, the Vaxxon had everything prepared. The Avalari research vessel now belonged to a company called Stellar Freight Solutions, with Zaratiel listed as chief pilot and Marcus as engineering specialist. The supporting documentation was impressively thorough, including business licenses, insurance certificates, and even fake customer reviews on freelancer databases. Very nice work, Zaratiel said, examining the documents. The Avalari research vessel turned out to be a sleek, graceful ship that looked more like a work of art than a utilitarian transport. Marcus had seen plenty of alien designs during his time on Nexus Station, but nothing quite like this. The hull seemed to flow like liquid metal, and the engine configuration was unlike anything in his engineering textbooks. She's beautiful, he said as they approached the docking bay where Zaratiel had hidden the ship. The whispered truth, Zaratiel replied. Avalari ships are traditionally named for philosophical concepts rather than dramatic declarations. This one was designed for long-range research missions where a single scientist might spend months alone in deep space. Marcus could see the wisdom in that design philosophy as they boarded. The interior was spacious despite the ship's relatively small size, with areas clearly designated for work, rest, and relaxation. Everything was built to a scale that could accommodate various species, and the control system seemed intuitive even to someone unfamiliar with Avalari technology. How fast can she go? Marcus asked, settling into what appeared to be the co-pilot's seat. Fast enough. The Avalari have always prioritized speed and efficiency in their ship designs. We should be able to reach the Kepler sector in approximately 10 days rather than the standard 2 weeks. That's good. The sooner we get this information to Dr. Chun, the sooner she can start working on exposing the conspiracy. Zaratiel began the pre-flight sequence with practiced efficiency. Marcus watched her work, impressed by her competence despite the stress of their situation. It occurred to him that he was trusting his life to someone he'd known for less than a day, but somehow that didn't seem important. There was something about her that inspired confidence. Marcus, she said as the ship's systems came online. There is something we should discuss before we depart. What's that? The likelihood that we will be pursued. My former colleagues are not fools, and they will have realized by now that I took more than just myself when I left. They will be looking for this ship, and they will not give up easily. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. How much of a head start do we have? Perhaps a day, possibly 2 if we are fortunate. But they have resources I cannot match, faster ships, better weapons, connections throughout civilized space that can help them track us. So we're probably going to be caught. Possibly. But not necessarily quickly, and perhaps not before we reach someone who can act on the information we carry. Marcus appreciated her honesty, even if it wasn't particularly reassuring. Any suggestions for how we improve our odds? Zaratiel was quiet for a moment as she completed the final checks. We avoid main shipping routes where possible. We minimize time in populated systems. And we hope that your species' reputation for unpredictability works in our favor. Unpredictability. Avalari strategic thinking relies heavily on logical analysis and pattern recognition. They plan for opponents who behave rationally and predictably. Humans have a tendency to make choices that seem illogical but prove effective. Marcus couldn't help but smile. You mean we're too crazy for them to anticipate what we'll do? That is a crude but accurate assessment. The whispered truth lifted off from Nexus Station with smooth precision, and Marcus felt a familiar thrill as they cleared the docking bay and accelerated into open space. It had been years since he'd been aboard a ship in transit, and he'd forgotten how much he missed the sense of freedom that came with traveling between the stars. For the first few hours, their journey was peaceful. They plotted a course that would take them through several lightly traveled systems, adding time to their trip, but reducing the chances of encountering Avalari patrols or their allies. Marcus used the opportunity to familiarize himself with the ship's systems, while Zaratiel worked on organizing her research data and preparing a presentation for Dr. Chen. It was during the second day of travel that things began to go wrong. Marcus, Zaratiel called from the pilot's station, her voice tight with concern. We have a problem. He hurried over from the engineering console, where he'd been studying the ship's remarkably efficient power systems. What kind of problem? Sensors are detecting a ship on an intercept course. Configuration matches Avalari pursuit vessels. Marcus felt ice in his veins. How far away? Approximately 6 hours at current relative speeds. They are definitely tracking us. Their course adjustments match ours exactly. Can we outrun them? Zaratiel shook her head. Pursuit vessels are designed specifically to catch ships like this one. They are faster and more maneuverable. In a straight chase, they will overtake us within 4 hours. Marcus stared at the sensor display showing the approaching ship as a small blip that somehow managed to look ominous despite being just a dot of light. So much for our head start. What are our options? We could surrender and hope they intend to take us alive for questioning. I don't like that option. Neither do I. Alternatively, we could attempt to lose them in the Meridian asteroid field. Marcus knew enough about stellar navigation to understand why that suggestion made her sound reluctant. That's the field with the unstable gravitational anomalies, isn't it? The one that's claimed dozens of ships over the years. The same. It would be extremely dangerous, but if we could successfully navigate through it, our pursuers might decide we are not worth the risk of following. Might. Avalari pilots are typically quite conservative when it comes to accepting unnecessary risks. However, if they have been ordered to capture us at all costs, they may pursue us regardless of the danger. Marcus looked at the tactical display, calculating distances and intercept times. They were running out of time to make a decision, and none of their options were particularly appealing. But, as he considered their situation, an idea began to form. What if we don't try to lose them or outrun them? He said slowly. Zaratiel turned to look at him with surprise. I do not understand. You said Avalari thinking is based on logical analysis and pattern recognition. They're expecting us to either run or hide, right? What if we do something completely different? Such as, Marcus felt the familiar excitement of working through a complex problem, the same feeling that had driven him through years of engineering school. What if we attack them? For a long moment, Zaratiel stared at him as if he'd suggested they try to fly through a star. Marcus, this is a research vessel. We have no weapon systems. They have a military pursuit ship designed specifically for combat. We don't need weapons. We just need to do something they won't expect. Marcus moved to the navigation console and began pulling up system maps. Look at the asteroid field again. What's the most dangerous part? There is a region near the center where the gravitational fields create unpredictable eddies. Ships that enter that area are often pulled off course and crushed against asteroids before they can correct their trajectory. What if we flew straight into that area, full speed, broadcasting a distress signal claiming our navigation systems failed? Zaratiel's eyes widened as she understood what he was suggesting. They would assume we are about to be destroyed and might attempt to rescue us. Exactly. And while they're positioning themselves for a rescue operation, We use the gravitational eddies to our advantage. If we can calculate the field patterns correctly, we might be able to slingshot ourselves out the other side of the field while they're still trying to figure out what happened. That plan is completely insane. But is it crazy enough to work? Zaratiel was quiet for several minutes, running calculations on the navigation computer. Finally, she looked up with an expression that mixed admiration with disbelief. It might actually work. The gravitational mathematics are complex, but if we time everything perfectly, we could gain enough velocity to break free of their pursuit. And if we time it wrong, we become another cautionary tale about the dangers of the meridian field. Marcus grinned. I like those odds better than surrendering or trying to outrun a ship that's faster than we are. Very well. But I should point out that this plan requires precise navigation through some of the most dangerous space in this sector, performed while under pursuit by people who want to capture or kill us. When you put it like that, it sounds almost easy. Despite the seriousness of their situation, Zaratiel smiled. You are either very brave or very foolish. Probably both. Let's go save the galaxy. The next few hours were the most terrifying of Marcus's life. They approached the Meridian asteroid field while their pursuers closed the distance, broadcasting increasingly urgent demands for them to stop and prepare to be boarded. Zaratiel responded with panicked-sounding messages about navigation failures and engine problems, selling their deception while simultaneously calculating the complex gravitational interactions that would either save them or kill them. When they finally plunged into the most dangerous part of the asteroid field, Marcus found himself gripping his seat restraints hard enough to leave marks. The ship bucked and rolled as gravitational eddies pulled them in multiple directions at once, and several times they came close enough to massive asteroids that he could see individual craters on their surfaces. But Zaratiel's piloting was nothing short of miraculous. She threaded the whispered truth through impossibly narrow gaps between spinning rocks, used gravity wells to redirect their momentum when direct thrust would have been insufficient, and somehow managed to keep them on course toward the exit point on the far side of the field. Behind them, their pursuers had entered the field as well, but they were being much more cautious in their approach. Marcus watched on the sensors as the Avalari ship fell further and further behind, clearly unwilling to match their reckless pace through the dangerous terrain. It's working, he said, hardly believing it himself. Do not celebrate yet, Zaratiel replied through gritted teeth. We still need to reach the exit point and achieve sufficient velocity to escape their sensor range. The final approach to the field's edge was the most harrowing part of the entire experience. They were moving so fast that even small course corrections required enormous effort to control, and the gravitational fields were so strong that the ship's hull groaned under the stress. But somehow, impossibly, they burst out of the asteroid field like a bullet fired from a gun, traveling at nearly twice their normal maximum velocity. Incredible, Zaratiel breathed, checking their speed and trajectory. We did it. Marcus looked at the sensor display and saw that their pursuers were still deep in the asteroid field, moving much more slowly and apparently struggling with their own navigation challenges. How long before they can catch up to us again? At our current speed, we will reach the next system before they can clear the field. From there, we can make several course changes that should make tracking us much more difficult. As the adrenaline began to wear off, Marcus realized he was shaking slightly. They'd just performed a maneuver that most pilots would consider suicide, and somehow they'd not only survived but accomplished exactly what they'd hoped to achieve. That was either the most brilliant or most stupid thing I've ever been part of, he said. Quite possibly both, Zaratiel agreed. But it worked. Looking at her as she worked to stabilize their course and plan their next jump, Marcus felt something that had nothing to do with their shared danger or their mission to save the galaxy. For the first time since they'd met, he was really seeing her, not as an alien scientist or a refugee or a partner in an impossible quest, but as a person. A remarkable person who had risked everything to do what she believed was right, who had trusted a stranger with her life, who had just pulled off a piece of flying that would have challenged the best pilots in human space. Zara, he said quietly. Yes. Thank you. For trusting me, for including me in this, for letting me be part of something that actually matters. She turned to look at him, and For a moment, the careful professional mask she usually wore slipped away. What he saw underneath was someone who had been carrying an enormous burden alone for too long. Someone who was grateful to finally have help she could trust. The Kepler sector turned out to be everything Marcus had hoped it would be, and nothing like what he'd expected. Dr. Sarah Chin's research foundation operated out of Harmony Station, a converted mining platform that had been transformed into something resembling a floating university. Ships from dozens of different species docked alongside each other, their crews mingling in the station's corridors as they collaborated on projects that promised to benefit everyone rather than serving narrow political interests. "It's like someone built the future I used to dream about," Marcus said as they approached the docking bay assigned to them. Zaratiel nodded, studying the station's configuration with obvious interest. Mixed species cooperation on this scale is unusual. Most such ventures fail due to cultural misunderstandings or competing agendas. Dr. Chun has always been good at getting people to work together. Back when I was in school, she had a reputation for assembling teams that shouldn't have functioned, but somehow produced amazing results. Their docking was routine, which felt almost anticlimactic after their harrowing escape from the pursuit ship several days earlier. Since leaving the Meridian field, they'd made good time through 3 different star systems without encountering any additional Avalari vessels. Either their pursuers had lost their trail, or they were being much more subtle about their tracking methods. Marcus tried not to think too hard about which possibility was more likely. Dr. Chun had agreed to meet with them after Marcus sent a carefully worded message through the academic communication networks. He'd been deliberately vague about the nature of their business, mentioning only that they had information about a potential threat to interspecies relations that required her expertise to evaluate properly. The woman who met them in the station's central plaza was smaller than Marcus remembered, but she carried herself with the same quiet confidence that had made her such an effective leader during her corporate days. Her hair had gone completely gray since he'd last seen her, and there were new lines around her eyes that spoke of long hours spent wrestling with complex problems. "Marcus Chun," she said with a smile that seemed genuinely pleased. "When I received your message, I wondered if it might be the same young man who designed that remarkable propulsion system several years ago. I was sorry to hear about what happened with that project." "Thank you, Dr. Chun. I appreciate you agreeing to see us on such short notice." Marcus gestured toward his companion. "This is Zaratiel. She's the one who actually has the information we need to share with you." Dr. Chin studied the Avalari woman with obvious curiosity. "And what sort of information might that be?" "The kind that could prevent a war," Zaratiel said quietly. "Or start one, depending on how it's handled." "I see. Perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more private." Dr. Chun led them through the station to a small conference room that overlooked the research labs where teams from multiple species worked side by side on various projects. Through the transparent walls, Marcus could see humans collaborating with Centauri engineers, Vaxan scientists comparing notes with their Terran colleagues, and at least 3 other species he didn't recognize participating in what appeared to be a heated but friendly debate about some technical problem. "Impressive operation you have here," Zaratiel observed. "Thank you. It took several years to build the trust necessary for this level of cooperation, but the results have been worth the effort." Dr. Chin settled into her chair and fixed them both with a direct look. "Now then, what sort of information requires such dramatic secrecy?" Zaratiel reached for the data device she'd been carrying since their escape from Avalari space. "What I am about to show you represents approximately 3 years of research conducted by the Avalari Science Directorate. Research that was supposed to improve communication between species, but has been perverted into something far more sinister." She activated the device, and a holographic display materialized in the center of the conference table. Marcus had seen portions of this data before during their journey, but seeing it all laid out systematically was still shocking. The Harmony Project had indeed started as legitimate research into interspecies communication, but the documents showed a clear progression toward applications that were purely focused on control and manipulation. Dr. Chin's expression grew increasingly grim as she reviewed the technical specifications, test results, and strategic planning documents. When Zaratiel finished her presentation, the room was silent for several long minutes. "This is," Dr. Chin finally said, then stopped and shook her head. I've seen some ethically questionable research in my time, but this is beyond anything I could have imagined. They're talking about systematic mind control on a species-wide scale. The initial testing has been conducted on prisoner populations, Zaratil explained. The results indicate that the technology is not only functional but highly effective. A single transmission can alter the behavior patterns of an entire population center. And they're specifically targeting humans? Among others, yes. The strategic documents identify several species that the Avalari leadership considers potentially threatening. Humans top that list due to your rapid territorial expansion and unpredictable diplomatic behavior. Marcus felt sick as he thought about the implications. How close are they to deployment? Based on the timeline in these documents, they could begin field testing within 6 months. Full deployment could follow within a year. Dr. Chun was quiet for a long time, studying the data with the kind of focused attention Marcus remembered from his student days. When she finally spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. This information needs to reach the highest levels of government in human space, as well as representatives from the other targeted species. But it also needs to be handled very carefully to avoid triggering the exact conflict they're trying to prevent. What do you mean? Marcus asked. If this information becomes public, or if it's presented incorrectly to government officials, it could easily be used to justify preemptive military action against the Avalari. That would play directly into their narrative about humans being dangerously aggressive. Zaratil nodded. I have been concerned about the same issue. The data proves what they are planning, but it could also be used to escalate tensions rather than resolve them. So what do we do? Marcus felt frustrated by the complexity of their situation. They'd risked everything to bring this information to someone who could act on it, only to discover that action itself was problematic. Dr. Chun was quiet for several more minutes, clearly thinking through various possibilities. There might be a way to handle this that could actually improve interspecies relations rather than damaging them. How? What if we could use this information to expose not just the Avalari conspiracy, but the broader problem of species-based discrimination and fear that makes such conspiracies possible in the first place? Marcus wasn't sure he understood what she was suggesting. You mean turn this into some kind of educational opportunity? Something like that. The Foundation has been working on a project designed to improve understanding between different species. We've been developing communication protocols and cultural exchange programs that help people see past their preconceptions about other races. That sounds useful, Zaratil said. But how would it address the immediate threat posed by the Harmony Project? By building a coalition of representatives from multiple species who can work together to address the threat collaboratively rather than through confrontation. If we can demonstrate that different races can cooperate effectively when they understand each other properly, it becomes much harder for extremists on any side to argue for aggressive solutions. The idea was ambitious, possibly to the point of being naive, but Marcus found himself intrigued by the possibility. You're talking about using the conspiracy as a catalyst for the kind of cooperation that would make future conspiracies less likely. Exactly. But it would require very careful coordination, and it would need to include Avalari representatives who oppose what their government is doing. Zaratil looked skeptical. I am not certain how many such representatives exist. The Science Directorate has been very effective at maintaining loyalty among its personnel. There must be others who share your concerns. People don't develop this kind of technology in isolation, and not everyone involved can be comfortable with its intended applications. Perhaps, but identifying and contacting such people would be extremely dangerous for all involved. Dr. Chun leaned back in her chair, clearly weighing the risks and benefits of her proposal. It would be dangerous. But the alternative, allowing this technology to be deployed or triggering a war to prevent its deployment, is far worse. Marcus found himself thinking about their journey from Nexus Station, about the risks they'd already taken and the trust they'd built despite coming from completely different worlds. Maybe trust is contagious. What do you mean? Zaratil asked. Look at what's happened with us. 3 days ago, I was a nobody bartender, and you were a refugee with nowhere to turn. Now we're partners who've survived being chased across the galaxy by working together. If we could do that, maybe other people can too. The Foundation's research supports that theory, Dr. Chin said. We found that people from different species are much more likely to cooperate effectively once they've had positive personal experiences with each other. The problem is creating opportunities for those experiences to occur. What if this situation could provide those opportunities? How so? Marcus felt an idea forming, one that was probably just as crazy as their escape through the asteroid field, but might be exactly what the situation required. What if we put together a mixed-species team to investigate the conspiracy and develop a response? Not a government task force or a military operation, but a group of people who represent the kinds of cooperation you've been promoting here. Zaratiel looked intrigued. A collaborative investigation that demonstrates the alternative to the fear and mistrust that created the conspiracy in the first place. The evidence we gather would be more credible if it came from representatives of multiple species working together, Dr. Chen added. And the process of gathering it could help build the relationships necessary to ensure a constructive response. It's still incredibly dangerous, Zaratiel pointed out. The Avalari leadership will not simply allow us to expose their plans without attempting to stop us. True. But now we wouldn't be trying to do this alone. And we'd be building something positive rather than just trying to prevent something negative. Dr. Chen stood up and moved to the window overlooking the research labs. I think I can identify people from several species who would be willing to participate in such an effort. The Foundation has connections throughout this sector, and many of our associates have been looking for ways to apply their work to larger-scale problems. How long would it take to organize something like this? Marcus asked. A few days, possibly a week if we need to wait for people to travel here. But she turned back to face them. Are you both willing to continue being part of this? What I'm proposing would require you to stay actively involved rather than simply turning the information over to someone else. Marcus looked at Zaratiel, realizing that their partnership had become something more than just a temporary alliance of convenience. Somewhere during their journey, he'd stopped thinking of her as an alien scientist he was helping and started thinking of her as someone he genuinely cared about. Someone whose safety and success mattered to him in ways that had nothing to do with saving the galaxy. I'm in, he said. This is too important to walk away from. Zaratiel nodded. As am I. I began this journey alone. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the main assembly hall of Harmony Station watching delegates from 12 different species debate the final details of the interspecies cooperation accords. The document they were arguing over would establish new protocols for sharing information about potential threats, create joint oversight committees for sensitive research projects, and, most importantly, mandate collaborative investigation of any activities that could affect multiple species. It had taken longer than anyone expected to build the coalition necessary to expose the Harmony Project, but the results had exceeded even Dr. Chen's optimistic projections. The mixed species investigation team they'd assembled hadn't just gathered evidence of the Avalari conspiracy. They demonstrated that different races could work together effectively when they understood each other's perspectives and motivations. You look contemplative, Zaratiel said, joining him at the observation window that overlooked the assembly floor. Just thinking about how much has changed since that night at the gravity well. She smiled, and Marcus felt the same small thrill he experienced every time she directed that expression at him. Indeed, who would have imagined that a conversation between a bartender and a refugee would lead to this? Any regrets? About which part? Stealing a government research vessel? Fleeing across the galaxy with classified information? Trusting my safety to someone I had known for less than a day? Any of it? All of it? Zaratiel was quiet for a moment, watching as a Zentari delegate made an impassioned speech about the importance of transparency in interspecies research. None. Even if we had failed completely, even if the conspiracy had succeeded, I would not regret choosing to act rather than remaining silent. What about choosing to trust me? She turned to look at him with an expression that made his heart race. That was the best decision I ever made. The investigation had been every bit as dangerous as they'd anticipated. The team they'd assembled, scientists, engineers, and researchers from 8 different species, had spent weeks gathering additional evidence, documenting the full scope of the Harmony Project, and building relationships with Avalari scientists who opposed their government's plans. There had been close calls, narrow escapes, and moments when it seemed like their efforts would be discovered before they could expose the truth. But they'd also accomplished something remarkable. The collaborative investigation had proven that the fears and mistrust underlying the Harmony Project were largely unfounded. When given the opportunity to work together openly, species that had been viewed as threats or competitors turned out to be valuable allies with complementary strengths and perspectives. The evidence they'd gathered had been presented not as an accusation against the Avalari people, but as proof that cooperation was both possible and beneficial for everyone involved. Rather than triggering the war that many had feared, the revelations had led to a galaxy-wide conversation about how to build better relationships between different civilizations. The Avalari delegation looks nervous, Marcus observed, nodding toward a group of officials who were huddled in intense discussion near the assembly floor. They should be. Their new government has committed to completely dismantling the Harmony Project and opening all their research facilities to joint oversight. That represents a significant shift in their traditional approach to dealing with other species. The political changes on the Avalari homeworld had been swift once the evidence became public. The leadership responsible for the Harmony Project had been removed from power, and a new administration had taken control with a mandate to rebuild trust with other species. Zaratiel had been offered a position in the new government, but she'd chosen to remain with the Foundation and continue her work on legitimate interspecies communication research. Any word from the human delegation about the proposed research sharing protocols? She asked. Marcus checked his personal communicator. They're still arguing about intellectual property rights, but Dr. Chen thinks they'll agree to the framework by the end of the week. Apparently, the potential benefits of collaborative research are too significant to ignore, even for the more commercially minded representatives. And the Zentari concerns about technology transfer? Resolved, according to the latest reports. Turns out their objections were based on misunderstandings about how the oversight committees would actually function. Once they realized that all species would have equal voice in decisions about sensitive research, they dropped their opposition. It had been fascinating to watch how many seemingly intractable conflicts dissolved once people from different species had the chance to explain their actual concerns rather than operating based on assumptions about each other's motivations. The Foundation's communication protocols had proven invaluable in facilitating those conversations, but the real breakthrough had been the simple recognition that most beings wanted similar things: safety, prosperity, and the opportunity to pursue their interests without interference from others. Marcus, Zaratiel said quietly, there is something I would like to discuss with you. Something in her tone made him turn to give her his full attention. What is it? Dr. Chun has offered me a permanent position here at the Foundation, leading a new department focused on interspecies research ethics. She has suggested that I might want to recommend someone to serve as my deputy director. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. Anyone particular in mind? Someone with engineering expertise, experience with multiple alien technologies, and a demonstrated ability to work effectively with beings from different species. Someone who has shown exceptional judgment in complex situations and whom I trust completely. Sounds like quite a person. He is. She moved closer to him, close enough that he could see the flecks of silver in her violet eyes. The question is whether he would be interested in a position that would require us to work very closely together on a permanent basis. How closely? Every day? Traveling to conferences together, collaborating on research projects, spending long hours in meetings and laboratories. It would mean seeing each other constantly. Marcus felt himself grinning. That sounds terrible. Who would want a job like that? I was hoping you would. The job or the constant proximity to you? Both. Marcus looked around the assembly hall, thinking about the path that had brought them here. 6 months ago, he'd been serving drinks to strangers and dreaming about a future that seemed impossible to reach. Now he was being offered the chance to help build that future alongside someone who had become far more important to him than a partner in an impossible mission. There's just one potential problem with your proposal, he said seriously. Zaratiel's expression grew concerned. What sort of problem? Well, if we're going to be working together that closely, spending that much time in each other's company, it seems inevitable that our professional relationship might become something more personal. Is that a problem? Not for me. But I wouldn't want you to feel like I was taking advantage of the situation. She laughed, a sound like music that never failed to make him smile. Marcus, I have been waiting for months for you to realize that I wanted our relationship to become more personal. I was beginning to think I would have to resort to much more direct methods to get your attention. More direct how? I was considering simply telling you that I am in love with you, and asking if you felt the same way. Marcus felt like the air had been knocked out of his lungs. You were going to do that? If you continued being oblivious for much longer, yes. Well, in that case, I should probably tell you that I've been in love with you since approximately our second day of traveling together. But I was afraid to say anything because I didn't want to complicate our mission or make you feel uncomfortable. You have been in love with me for months and said nothing? I'm apparently not very good at reading interspecies romantic signals. Zaratiel stepped closer to him, close enough that they were almost touching. Perhaps I should be more direct about my intentions. Before Marcus could respond, she reached up and kissed him. It was gentle at first, tentative, but when he responded by pulling her closer, it became something deeper and more certain. When they finally broke apart, Marcus realized that several delegates in the assembly hall had noticed their display of affection and were watching with expressions ranging from amusement to approval. I think we just became a diplomatic incident, he said. On the contrary, I think we just became an example of the kind of interspecies cooperation the Accords are designed to promote. Marcus looked around the hall again, seeing it now as more than just a place where important documents were being negotiated. It was proof that the future he dreamed about was not only possible, but actually happening. Different species working together, sharing knowledge and resources, building something better than any of them could create alone. And somehow, impossibly, he was not only part of it, but partnered with someone who shared his vision and his commitment to making it real. So, he said, about that job offer. When do I start? Immediately, if you are willing. We have approximately a dozen different research proposals to review, 3 conferences to organize, and at least 50 interspecies collaboration requests to evaluate. Sounds like we're going to be very busy. Indeed. I hope you do not mind spending your time working on projects that might actually change the galaxy for the better. Marcus thought about his old dreams of building starships that would revolutionize space travel, and realized that what they were building together was far more important than any individual technological breakthrough. They were creating new ways for different civilizations to understand and trust each other, laying the groundwork for a future where cooperation was the norm rather than the exception. I can't think of anything I'd rather do, he said honestly. Even if it means working closely with an alien scientist who has a tendency to get into trouble, especially because of that. As they stood together watching the delegates continue their debates about the shape of the galaxy's future, Marcus realized that their story had come full circle. It had started with one night in a bar where a lonely bartender had chosen to help a stranger in distress. Now it was becoming something much larger, a partnership that would help ensure that the kind of fear and mistrust that had created the Harmony Project would be replaced by the understanding and cooperation they demonstrated was possible. It wasn't the ending he'd imagined when he first agreed to help Zaratiel expose the conspiracy. It was better. It was a beginning rather than an ending, the first chapter of a story that would continue for as long as they both lived. And, as Zaratiel slipped her hand into his and squeezed gently, Marcus knew that whatever challenges they faced in the years ahead, they would face them together. 2 beings from different worlds who had found something in each other that transcended the boundaries between species. Proof that love, like cooperation, was a force that could overcome any obstacle when people were willing to trust each other enough to try. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders neither of them had yet discovered. But the most important discovery they would ever make was standing right there beside them, ready to build a future that would be worthy of the dreams they shared. I no longer wish to continue it that way. Dr. Chen smiled. Then, let's build something remarkable together. As they began discussing the practical details of organizing a multi-species investigation team, Marcus realized that their mission had evolved into something far more ambitious than simply exposing a conspiracy. They were attempting to create a new model for interspecies cooperation, one that could serve as an alternative to the fear and mistrust that made conspiracies like the Harmony Project possible in the first place. It was ambitious to the point of seeming impossible, but then, again, so had been their escape from Nexus Station and their flight through the Meridian Field. Sometimes the most impossible things turned out to be exactly what the situation required. And sometimes the most important journeys began with the simple decision to trust someone who seemed like a stranger, but turned out to be exactly the partner you needed. "Thank you for staying," she said simply. "When I told you my story, I expected you to wish me well and walk away. Most people would have. Most people didn't have their lives stolen by bureaucrats and politicians. Most people haven't spent years feeling like their existence doesn't matter to anyone. And now," Marcus looked around the ship that had become their temporary home, thought about the mission that had become their shared purpose, and realized that for the first time in years he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. "Now I feel like I'm finally doing something worth doing." Crix preened slightly at the praise. "Old Crix not stay in business this long by doing sloppy work. Your ship now has legitimate reason to travel anywhere in civilized space. Just remember, documentation only good as your ability to play roles. Anyone who looks too closely at your backgrounds will find holes if they know what to look for." "Understood," Marcus said. "Thanks, Crix. We owe you one. You owe me nothing. You pay fair price for fair service." "But, Marcus," the vaccin's expression grew serious. "Whatever you two are really doing, be careful. Crix can change records, but cannot change fact that you are both walking into very dangerous situation." As they made their final preparations to leave Nexus Station, Marcus realized that there was no turning back now. Tomorrow morning, they would board Zaratiel's ship and begin a journey that would either save countless lives or get them both killed in the attempt. Looking at his alien partner as she checked and double-checked their forged documents, Marcus felt a strange mixture of fear and excitement. 24 hours ago, he'd been a failed engineer serving drinks to strangers. Now he was part of a conspiracy that could reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. It wasn't the future he'd planned, but it was definitely more interesting than anything he could have imagined. Was a sound like silver bells, and Marcus found himself smiling in response. "Neither do I," she admitted. "But perhaps that will work in our favor. It is difficult for enemies to predict the actions of people who do not know what they are going to do themselves." As they sat there in the dim light of the gravity well, surrounded by the noise and chaos of a space station that never slept, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years: hope. Tomorrow, he would quit his job, pool his savings with whatever resources Zaratiel had left, and help her expose a conspiracy that threatened the freedom of his entire species. It was crazy, impossible, and probably suicidal. It was also the most alive he'd felt since watching his dreams crash and burn 3 years ago. Sometimes the best decisions were the ones that scared you the most.